Die Diaspora spricht. Sailor.
Parlando.
Diaspora.
Diaspora spricht.
Diaspora speaking.
Përshëndetje. My name is Rina Limoni and I am the host of Diaspora Speaking. In the coming months, together with our guests, we will explore the journeys, personal histories, activism, and academic developments concerning Kosovar, Albanian, and Balkan diasporas to attain a deeper understanding of our communities scattered around the globe. In this episode, we will be speaking with Vlor Krug, who grew up in Germany as a child of a guest worker family during a time when Albanian communities were rare and whose experience provides us with a unique insight into Kosovar-Albanian guest worker lives in Germany. Vlor is a skilled changemaker and organizational developer who has helped many companies navigate their digital transformations. She is deeply committed to making workplaces more inclusive and equitable, and she is passionate about using her voice to address important issues like structural discrimination. When she is not working, Vlor loves bringing people together, whether it's through organizing the first tango festival in Pristina or leading lean-in circles in Berlin, where she lives with her German husband and her 2 sons. Thank you for being here, Vlor. Thank you for accepting my invitation to speak on this topic today.
Faleminderit, Rina, for having me today. I'm also really happy to share my perspective on the journey of a migrant.
Just to break the ice, where are you from in Kosovo? Where did you grow up in Germany? And what do you do in your day-to-day? And because we are diaspora speaking, what makes you think about diasporas?
I was born in Ličan, into a very big tribe, Komun Klinas, close to Klina. And it was a huge tribe, so my parents and their siblings, or my father's sibling, were still united. And when I was 2 years old, I had to move to Stuttgart, South Germany. And now I live in Berlin. Like the last 14 years, I have been living in Berlin. What I think about diaspora is sometimes you don't choose to be diaspora. It happens to you, and then you have to find your own way to deal with it. Yeah.
In your social media posts, you speak a lot about your migration history, and you include your family and your experience and what it meant to move to Germany. Could you perhaps walk us through your early years in Germany and how you confronted this new path in your life?
Basically, I didn't choose to migrate. I think this is really important. My family was very, very poor. So my father decided, after working in Yugoslavia for some years, to go to Germany, and he did the checkups and migrated in May 1970 and lived without his wife and his children for 12 years in Germany. I was a so-called Kofferkind, so there is a specific terminology for kids like us. We were sent back and forth, or we just met our parents once a year. I was 2 years old, then we suddenly had to leave Kosovo due to political situations. And I was 2 years old, my brother was 5 years old, and my youngest sister was just 3 months old. And my mom was sent into a train to Germany. Nowadays, having 2 kids myself, I cannot imagine how you can travel with a baby without diapers, because we didn't used to have like these Pampers. So, and and also like having 3 kids, don't speaking the language. And also for me, it was very traumatic, because if you're 2 years old, you don't have the intellect to process what is happening to you. But my whole life, everybody was telling me, but you were just 2 years old, come on, Flora. You didn't have to integrate because you were a kid. It was really late in my life, and shortly before I turned 40, that I reflected on this traumatic separation, because we also had to leave siblings and family behind. Also my grandma, who basically raised me, and my oldest sister. So I had 3 mothers, as I like to say, my mom, my sister, and my grandma. And when I visited my aunt shortly before I turned 40, she reflected with me on how my mom suffered, especially with me. Like my oldest brother, like the one who joined, he knew what happened. He was 5 years old. He could intellectually proceed. that we are in Germany now. My youngest sister was 3 months old, so yeah. It didn't really affect her, but I was 2 years old, and my auntie told me, like, my mom, when they were on the phone, she was always saying, Flora nuk pa adaptohet, hiç nuk pa adaptohet. Flora is not integrating at all. She is not dealing with this separation. And now having all my children and seeing how hard it is to give them away, even like for 2 hours for a babysitter. And so I realized this was a very, very traumatic step, and that I was never allowed to mourn, or I wasn't even allowed to talk about it, because it was like we had to do it. And we then had to live in Germany, in Stuttgart. At that time, there were not a lot of Albanians, because most of the guest workers that came with a contract to Germany, most of them, they came without a family, because this was cheaper. Yeah, because their biggest aim was to send money back to their families and to build houses in Kosovo. And my father even built like the whole system brought pipes from Germany to build the system so that my family, or even the whole village, had running water. This was like really, I would say, yeah, development work from Germany he offered to our community. And so I grew up in Germany. There was no possibility I could join the kindergarten. My mother didn't have like the possibility to learn German. So she basically cannot speak German even after 30 years of migration. And it was very hard for me, because I was judged on this very often. But she had like little children. There was no opportunity that we had childcare, and she had to deal with integrating. And so we used to live like in a guest workers shelter housing, and there were like different kind of nationalities, Italian kids, kids from Turkey, from Spain. So it was very, very loud. And I remember it as being not the surrounding I like to be, because I used to be in Kosovo, like in the village with animals outside with all of my cousins, and all of a sudden we were very isolated in a way. And I was really happy when I finally could go to school, because I felt the urge of going to school. But even there, I experienced a lot of discrimination. Like, look, this migrant cannot even hold a scissor. So I was judged in the first grade that I was not able to hold a scissor, and I wasn't. And I think it's important just that my parents didn't teach me how to hold a scissor, that this doesn't make me dumb. And I think there's so many prejudices about migrants, and that's also how I started then to write about it, because I even thought my parents are dumb. They're uneducated. That's what everybody told me. And at some point, you internalize what you hear constantly in the media and from your teachers and from your friends and from your neighbors. You internalize this racism and this prejudices against yourself, against your community. There was this moment I had like a conversation with migrants who were, let's say, new kind of migrants, the ones who are coming now to Germany, like, who come with a proper visa, who studied somewhere. And so they were like, the migrants from the 60s and 70s, they were like the bad ones. They're the dumb ones. We are the good migrants. We are the ones who are educated and intellectual. And this really hurt me, because we were not the dumb and bad migrants. We were the migrants Germany needed at that time. They needed muscles and not brain. I decided to be more vocal, to show people that we exist, that a lot of us are like really successful in Germany, but we were used to be silenced. So like, don't be vocal, don't be loud, try to adopt. And so it was a lot about not being seen as a criteria for integration and success, not being seen as like, Rina,
Yes.
yeah.
I think this is something, and I'm very happy you just touched up on this point, because when we go to Kosovo, we are privileged. And in Germany, we are required to remain grateful.
Yes.
We have to submit. And I think this rupture of living and migrating is so traumatic. As children, we lack the intellectual tools to critically evaluate and assess what is happening to us. And in addition to that, our parents are in a new environment, or as you say, your mother in this regard. And then something that colors in our experiences is the idea of class. It has an impact on our educational path, especially in Germany, because a lot of people are not aware. In Germany, there is a strong hierarchy to who gets to go to university and who is not entitled to do so. But to draw back to this experience, you mentioned how you're torn between different factors. being a mensch, occupying a particular space, means building a life there. And in between these discourses, one lives, one creates an entire life. How do you think these experiences have shaped your social relationships, generally speaking, and how you view yourself within this space? You also said thinking about your traumatic experience came in your 40s or early 40s.
I think nowadays I trust my feelings more, my emotions. And if I don't like something, I talk about it way earlier. So I realize that I am also important. I'm not somebody who has to be grateful. I really think the first 40 years, I grew up thinking I have to be grateful and I have to prove everybody with my work, with my passion, that I deserve to be in Germany. And now I think, no. Also, Germany has to be grateful. And I'm really proud because now in Berlin, they're building a monument for guest workers and also reflecting on what we did for Germany. And so I think for me, it's now, we should all be more on eye level. And if I'm on eye level, I'm now more prone of saying if I don't like something, if I feel hurt, and that I trust my feelings more and don't get overstepped by somebody who seems to be above me. Because I think all these three factors, classism, racism, and feminism, have formed my life and how I live and how I got repressed also in many ways.
But when we first spoke, something that you mentioned more than once, pondering on this point on your background in Germany, you mentioned Verzicht. When you moved as a family to Germany, Verzicht, it means having to forego a lot of things that perhaps the dominating society or German kids took for granted.
Yeah, I also think both sides don't see this. Like, I mean, you have to picture how it was in the 80s. So there was no WhatsApp. So basically, all family ties were gone. So calling my family meant somebody had to drive to the next village, and it was super expensive to have like a phone call. From 2 to 10, I didn't have a contact to my family anymore because I was not allowed to travel back. The Verzicht was you lose the language, you lose your relation and ties to the family. You still live in your old structure because your parents tried to conserve everything because their idea was always to go back. It was really hard to integrate because at some point we used to be like this role model skipetars because everybody was scared that we small kids who were not meant to grow up in Germany now got spoiled from the Western culture or German mindset. And I felt like always this loyalty conflict between, I like Germany and I liked also Kosovo, but I feel urged to decide to be loyal to only one country. And this is the worst you can do to somebody. Force loyalty to only one parent. We have two parents or multiple parents. Nowadays, there's pluralism. And if you force somebody to dedicate exclusivity love to only one person or one country, and you experience to grow up with more, this is really, really harsh. Yeah.
You mentioned being an orphan.
Yes, being an orphan, yeah.
And you just said the digital world has changed. When you moved, you didn't have the privilege of having a WhatsApp call with your sister or your aunt at home, something that also contributes how you emotionally bond with Kosovo.
Es wurden Arbeiter gerufen, doch es kamen Menschen an. Solange es viel Arbeit gab, gab man die Drecksarbeit uns ab. Doch dann, als die große Krise kam, sagte man, wir sind schuld daran. Amman, 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 Gastarbeiter. Amman, 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 Gastarbeiter. Es wurden Arbeiter gerufen, doch es kamen Menschen an. Es wurden Arbeiter gerufen, doch es kamen Menschen an. Ihr wollt nicht unsere Kultur, nicht mit uns sein, ihr wollt uns nur als Fremde sehen, so bleiben wir Unbekannte dort wie hier. Amman, 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 Gastarbeiter. Amman, 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 Amman.
But to, I think, go back again to your guest worker family, because I think it's very peculiar. Your dad, he was a political activist in addition to being a guest worker in Germany. And your reason for moving to Germany was actually his involvement in political activism, which shows again how the Yugoslav structures extended and impacted your life both in Kosovo as well as in Germany. Though you were small, do you have any memory of your father's political activity? Or do you remember anything from that time during the 90s as you grew older?
I mean, it was mostly in the 80s. We even went to Tirana in 84 as a kid. And I remember because we were like a huge group, and it was at that time, because there were not that many Albanians, it had a huge diversity. We were born to people from Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, and it was a nice community of friends of my father and activists and all the kids of them. So we were like hanging out with these Albanian kids, and we went to demonstrations. We had concert that my father organized and patriotic singers, and I had to recall poems. Oi Kosovo, non ime. I mean, this is the song, this is the theme of my growing up. And so, but this led to me that I felt really alienated because I didn't understand what we were fighting for. And I didn't understand why there was no money for me having toys, because all the money was sent back to Kosovo, like for 20 years. First supporting the war, then supporting memorials, so there was never money for us. We had to endure that we're not that important to our parents. And I think this is also disturbing if you're a child, because you want to be the center of your parents. I mean, nowadays, I think it's really good because no child is more important than the whole community. Yeah, because if you put your own child into the center of everything, you're not caring for your climate, your economic surrounding, you're not showing solidarity. And I really learned how important it is to protect people who are, I mean, my father protected in our basement, I mean, politicians from Kosovo. And of course I saw this. I just always saw my mother in the kitchen baking pita, baking burek. And because we had always guests, and it was the whole living room was like full of people. And I like this social aspect of committing to progress and having hope. And I think it was, for my father especially, it was crazy because he always thought he's never going to experience this moment that he can travel back and have the soil of Kosovo beneath his feet. He was crying when he touched the soil of his motherland for the first time after, I think it was 18 years that he was allowed to travel back. And giving up for such a big purpose, it's really touching. This is, I mean, what I always say is like, of course, there were dark sides of the migration, but I really tried to focus on what are the bright sides. Being tight, having solidarity in a community, always looking forward, building resilience. But sure, I also was often scared because the police was very often at our house. Then in the 90s, there were second migration of Albanians. It was the asylanten, the asylum seeker people, and they were not integrated well. And I also had a lot of prejudices due to media. Nowadays, in retrospective, I'm even ashamed of how I thought about it. And so my father was leading one of the biggest Albanian clubs in southern Germany with 600 members. And every time something happened, the police, of course, came to my father because they knew him and he was the head of. I mean, he helped the police. I mean, I was a kid and I had to experience it. And the police came, somebody died, committed suicide. Could you help us? Somebody got killed by a Nazi. Can you help us? We experienced also the hate and the racism and how my father dealt with it and how he supported the community. Supporting meant also like bringing back the corpse to Kosovo. And I think now that we are again having this racist movement in Europe, it's re-traumatizing for us from second generation that we have to experience this again.
This is knowledge that often gets lost because unfortunately diaspora is viewed as a monolith, especially I have to say the Kosovar-Albanian diaspora in Germany, which has a rich and diverse history. You just mentioned that the 90s changed migration. But after all, whether you moved, as your experience shows, your father's exile was 18 years long. We are products of war. And even when we are abroad, we take Kosovo with us and cannot entirely escape it, at least for us who are in between. As you showed me the other day, it's 1.5 generation.
Yes.
There are children of migrants who move to a particular place before adolescence. They are called 1.5 generation. But to go back to your father's activism, you mentioned your father was also active within the circle of the Garala brothers. Do you have any memory, or is there any story you could share where your father has met them, and how was the first encounter?
So it was just recently that I asked my father how he met Garala, Yusuf Garala. Because I mean, this Yusuf Garala led to the fact that I grew up in Germany, because he was killed in Germany, and then my father was scared that, yeah, they're going to attack us in Kosovo, his children. And so I asked him, Dad, how did you, by the way, meet Yusuf Garala? And then he told me a story that really got me crying. In the 70s, they were so scared to spend their money on Gaststätte, like in pubs, that they had to mentally protect themselves from distraction or the lure of consumerism, that they had Sundays book clubs. So my father, who's a Mason, like he's one of these Bausteli, everybody loves about Albanian Baustelis. He had a catalog where he would order books from Albania. And so they would sit every Sunday and read poems and literature. I mean, this is a construction worker who only went for 8 years to school because he was so poor that he couldn't afford. Yeah, he was the oldest of 8 children. So he read literature, lyrics, to keep himself mentally safe in the diaspora. So he wouldn't spend money on alcohol or pubs. There was Bardosh Garvala, the brother of Yusuf Garvala. Of course, they met in Stuttgart, and so Bardos asked, like, could I get this books for my brother? And my dad was, yeah, sure, take them. Bardos would send like all of the books in a huge package back to Kosovo to Yusuf Garvala. At some point, Yusuf had to leave Kosovo because he was a political activist. And then Yusuf, when he was in Stuttgart for the first time, he told his brother, I want to meet this Murat Kriziu because he sent me all these books. And so that's where it happens. And my father even like bought a printer. They did all these newsletters. So the social media printed, so, and did all this activism. And he spent his own money. Like he spent his own money for all this political activism, building, like buying paper, buying the printer, so that they could print their activism. And I'm really proud of this because it shows that it's all about being human. And now people always dehumanize refugees or people who are, let's say, on the bottom, yeah, and say they're dumb or they don't want to do more, they don't learn. I realize that the system makes you who you are. The better surrounding, the more support you have, the more you grow. If I see how now people are talking, even like now, Kosovarians are talking against people from Afghanistan or Syria, saying, oh, they're bad and we don't want them. And we are just reproducing the racism we received 20 years ago. And we have to stop it. We really have to be human. It's not a solution to always reproduce racism because it's not going to make a better society. It's just going to lead people who don't feel loved, that they're going to spread hate, that they're going to find people who promise them something and they will act malicious.
Something you just touched upon were the asylum wave from Kosovo in the 1990s and the Kosovar-Albanian community. How do you think, in difference to guest workers, did this change how Kosovar-Albanians are viewed both in Germany and Kosovo?
Albanians who came in the 90s, they were portrayed as being villains. They are also called Schatzis because they used to flirt a lot with German women, and they had a very, very bad reputation. Also, the media built a bad reputation. I also got influenced by this, thinking all Albanians are uneducated, are primitive. And I didn't realize, although I came from Kosovo, these were refugees. They left their country because they didn't have food, they couldn't couldn't go to school. They had fear, as also these people from Syria now have fear and don't have proper living in their home country. And I didn't see this because I saw what the media was telling me, although I should have known better. And we also have to say the guest workers, because a lot of people even now, they say, the first generation was such a good generation. They had respect towards the police. They had respect towards authorities. I mean, this is so insane for me to hear that they now, in nostalgia, say the first generation was amazing, Ausländer, because they already got repressed. And now they're like, oh, they were so amazing. But of course they were amazing because they were dependent. But we are now the third generation. We are not dependent on money or contracts because we're Germans. We live here. And of course, if somebody is living in his or own motherland, demand something. We demand also now to be part of media, part of politics. And I think this is now where the integration paradox starts. People say us, we're not integrated. I'm like, yeah, we're that integrated that we want to be part. And this raises conflict, of course. Maybe I got lost a bit here, but yeah.
No, I think it's an important point because unfortunately in Germany, we are reproduced as others continuously.
Yeah.
I mean, I've lived in Germany, I grew up there as well. And I understand through this discourses were never fully allowed to arrive. And as you're saying, you've been living there for such a long time and you're German because you're no longer dependent or have to live in fear. This means it brings the notion of being entitlement. And I think something guest workers didn't have and something we need to think about as well as we are critically navigating these spaces. I think this is how we met through your very famous LinkedIn post. And it links to this you mentioned also earlier in this conversation, the guest worker 2.0, famously now coined in German media. Those who are coming from Kosovo and other Balkan states to Germany on visas with language skills and also professions because they are coming to work as well. How do you think this will change migration discourses for our community, particularly in Germany, but also how we are viewed in Kosovo?
So I do still see the same challenges. When my father tried to get a flat for us with 3 small children, it was really hard for him. His name is Murat, so everybody always thought he's a Turk, and Turks got a lot of racism in Germany. And so it was really, really hard for him to get a flat, to get us out of this horrible venue. I grew up playing in the sand of construction workers. Yeah. And nowadays I see I have a lot of Albanians in my company working. From Macedonia, from Albania, from Kosovo, but also they still face the same challenges. As soon as they are looking or headhunting, it's their name. So that people are like, oh, you're from Kosovo. I don't take people from Kosovo. So this is the rejection they get. And although this girl, who's a developer, highly educated, with a high income, has blonde hair, but her name and her passport is from Kosovo. There's still prejudices because if you can select, if you're in the majority culture and you can decide whom you let into your flat, it's still that you decide for the known and not for the unknown. The unknown, it's really hard to get still a childcare. Yeah. I think it's at the moment 20% of migrant parents don't have a childcare spot for their kids, although they want. And then there's a narrative that they say, oh no, these migrants, they don't send their kids to childcare because they're uneducated. And this is not true. We want to send our children to childcare, but sometimes it's very expensive. In southern Germany, you pay up to 400 euros a month. And if you're a migrant and you don't inherit a flat or a real estate from your parents or grandparents because you start from zero, it's really hard to have the money for the living. They don't come for the money anymore because the rents are high, food is super expensive. Yeah. Schools or kindergarten matters in where you live, it's super expensive, and it's really hard to save money or to build something with the income.
So regardless of having a particular status, one is shelved or has to place oneself in a particular stream in the hierarchy. And I think this brings us to our last question, something that I'd like to know from all of my guests in this podcast. If there is one thing you could bring from Kosovo, what would it be?
My father always told me the best in Kosovo are the people. And I think what makes the people are emotions. And so I would bring strong emotions because strong emotions, they protect you from being manipulated.
That's very beautiful. That's a strong statement. Thank you so much, Vlor, for being with me here today. It was a pleasure and also very interesting to hear about your particular experience.
I want to say thank you, Rina, for making our stories visible, for making us visible and giving us the space to be who we truly are. You do good by allowing us to share our voices. This means so much to me.